Blasio, soy el defensor del pueblo de la ciudad de New York. Quiero darles las gracias a todos por la invitación a este evento. Yo sé que el 27 de febrero es el Día de Independencia Dominicana. Quiero celebrar con ustedes ese día. Bill de Blasio, I'm your public advocate, and I'm so honored to be here tonight and so glad to be invited to this event. I want to say thank you to Northern Manhattan Democrats for Change. Thank you to the Barack Obama Democratic Club, two really extraordinary organizations that organize communities year-round, not just when it's election time, on issues that make a difference to people. Just to everyone who's a part of both clubs, you have a lot to be proud of. Yeah. And for the wonderful representatives of this community, Adriano, Espaillat, Gabriela, Rosa, Ydanis, Rodriguez, Robert Jackson, so many true progressives who have made an impact all the time. I thank them and their great colleagues. So I know my instruction is to just take a couple of minutes to talk a little biographically and then to be grilled by the panel. The panel is waiting for it's like the barbecue chef waiting to grill. Look, as some of you may have seen, I announced my candidacy for mayor on Sunday. And I did it outside my house in Brooklyn. And both my wife and my son spoke. And I think just in the few moments that we spent with friends and supporters from all over the city gathered right on our block, we tried to not just say, but to show what we believe in. Neighborhood, we believe in family, we believe in our public schools, and both my children have been public school students the whole way through, and they have gotten a great education in New York City public schools. So much so that my son Dante, who, you know what, my wife Marlene and I said to Dante, we were actually on the way to the presidential inauguration. And we were driving to Washington, we turned to him and said, Dante, we're going to have our kickoff on Sunday. We want to know if you want to speak. And Dante said yes right away. And we said, well, what do you want to say? He said, I'll just make something up. We said, Dante, all of us who have been in public life can advise it's never good to just make something up. So we said, we want you to really think about it. So he's in the backseat of the car, and literally about 10 minutes later, he hands my wife a piece of paper. And it was the speech that he gave on Sunday, and it was absolutely beautiful. And it made me so proud as a father that he had thought so deeply about his city and our future that he's a 15-year-old, but he had a lot to say. Now, what I did not know was his hair. He has a very large afro. I did not know his hair would instantly become more famous than me. It was not part of the plan. And now my lawyers are trying to figure out if there's a way that we could actually put a hairstyle on the ballot and have people vote for it. We haven't figured out the technicalities yet. But really, I think as a father, as a public school parent, as someone who believes deeply and is connected to the neighborhood I'm from, like so many of us, that our neighborhood is so crucial. That's the perspective I bring, and the perspective that's been lacking at City Hall. And then I'll say, just as a matter of experience, and Adriano will be my witness, I believe this is my 24th year of working with this community, starting with my experience as the first time David Dinkins ran for mayor on that campaign and the 4 years he served at City Hall. But I've also been honored to work with this community in the time I spent as the regional director for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development under President Clinton when Andrew Cuomo was secretary, in the time I spent in the city council where I led the way on affordable housing legislation, and I served as the chairperson of the Social Services Committee, fighting for children, fighting against homelessness, and now as public advocate. It has been my real honor to work with activists, parents, tenants in this community, and I will finish with this. I knew I was coming up here tonight, and I knew one thing for certain. The room would be absolutely filled. because this community should be so proud. There is literally no place in the city where civic involvement and political activism are deeper and more spirited and more fully engaged than right here, and that's a lot to be proud of.
So I think the first question we're all wondering is how long you've been studying Spanish.
Gran secreto. Now, the truth of that is that I went to Columbia University for my master's degree in the School of International Affairs, and my specialization was in Latin American studies. And I actually thought I was going to spend my career focused on international issues. I got very involved with the Central American movement, which was that was the late 1980s, Nicaragua, El Salvador, trying to defend the interests of those countries and the people of those countries, sometimes against U.S. foreign policy. But that's where I first learned.
Excellent. Muy bien.
Gracias.
So let's move on to crime. We've asked some of the candidates before you to talk a little bit about specific policing policies that you might like to see implemented. One of the things that I have heard from residents in the community over the past 5 years is that some of the policing tactics, obviously stop and frisk, specifically the impact zone deployment in hotspots in the neighborhoods. First of all, residents tell me that they're concerned that it's not a long-term strategy and cannot be continued. And many residents also say that they feel like they're actually being oppressed by the police by having a police officer on every single corner. How do you balance the need for targeted crime reduction policies and procedures while building goodwill amongst the NYPD and the residents in this community specifically?
I appreciate that question a lot because I believe in community policing. I believe that if you want real, lasting security, it requires a bond between community and police. It requires communication, mutual respect, and a mutual plan. And I think your question gets to some of the ways we've lost that. If we are I know we're overusing stop and frisk. I know stop and frisk is being used to such a degree that it is actually undermining, corroding the relationship between police and community. Which means it's not only bad policy today and very questionable in terms of civil liberties. It also means it's undermining the future of the security of a community, and police and community don't get along the way they need to. So I believe in a vision of community policing that says, when police officers know they are safe in the community because the community has their back, and residents of the community know that the police are on their side and respecting them, that's when we get a deeper security. We need to bring stop and frisk way down. I believe it's a valid policing tool, but I think it needs to be returned to something like the levels we saw in the beginning of the current administration. You know, the first few years of the Bloomberg administration, 100 to 150,000 stops a year. Earlier, this last year, it was on a pace to 800,000. That's unacceptable. So I'd say reform stop and frisk. I believe in gang intervention strategies that I think are community-oriented and can be very effective. But I think a lot of the strategies where you flood officers into an area without a grounding in the area and a connection to the area are short-lived at best, sometimes counterproductive. I believe the police department now at about 34,000 members must be preserved at that level. It should not get smaller. But I think ultimately, with a new commissioner, and I think we need a new commissioner. That's a bottom line for me. We need new leadership in NYPD. And I respect, I'll say the obvious, I respect Ray Kelly. But for the kind of vision of community policing I have, I believe he's not in a position to implement it at this point, given how he's approached things. And I believe we need a reinvigorated civilian complaint review board. It was supposed to be meaningful. It never has been. And we need an inspector general. So there's an independent oversight body that actually helps the police policy stay on the right track and stay focused on communities.
Two questions. Would you be in favor of bringing on more police? And are you in favor of bringing back the beat cop? Do you think that's even a possibility?
Yes, I do think it's a possibility because we've seen over the years, it's one of these strange things where the beat cop concept was traditional, was effective, then it was gone to the squad car concept, then it came back, then it was gone. It works. It works. People appreciate a visible police presence and a presence that's human, that they can get to know and they can communicate with. So yes, I believe even with the current resource dynamics, we can move more of our capacity towards a beat cop model. I do want to see more police, but I don't want to ever get into the practice of not telling the whole truth to people. I don't think we're going to be in a position budgetarily to add substantially to police, certainly not in the next few years. I think the one thing I commit to is that the current level will not be reduced. We draw that line in the sand. Over time, I'd like to see the increase. But whatever the number of cops, return to the notion of cops, whether it's on foot, on bicycle, whatever way it is, but cops connecting with the community regularly.
So just one very quick question. There's been a lot made about attrition rates with police officers. We have a wave of officers who are about to retire. Would you keep policing levels at the same number or not replace?
Number, 34, so we're 34,000, it varies a little bit from month to month, but 34,000 plus, that's the, what would lock us in at no fewer than 34,000.
You have said that you are the outer borough dad, that you're not going to focus, I guess, resources just in one borough, or you want to treat everybody equally. The best example of how things did not work well was during the Sandy storm. A lot of our communities were complaining that resources got to them really late. And well-off communities were received resources first. Then, let's say, people in the Jamaica Bay or in East New York, or communities that were now on Staten Island. What would you do to prevent things like that from happening if you win the mayoralty?
So a couple of points you combined there. I want to see if I can speak to it properly. You'll tell me what I missed. I've said about this city today, and I believe it's true in general, and I believe it's true in the response to Sandy, that we are living a tale of two cities. And I think it's important we be honest about it. You know, I've said this phrase, and some people like to throw back that somehow it's divisive. You know what's divisive is not acknowledging this growing income disparity in our city. And it's divisive to not admit that our schools work well for some kids and are failing other kids in many neighborhoods. So I think unity is based on a very substantial material dynamic. If people believe they're being treated fairly and they see a real devotion to helping every kind of people, there's opportunity for every kind of people, that's when you build a truer unity. But why I say it's a tale of two cities is that it's not just that people have had different levels of opportunity, it's that our city government is not doing enough to change it and fix it. In some ways, city policies are making it worse. And that's where I talk about an elitism at City Hall, and certainly a worldview that doesn't see all 5 boroughs in every type of neighborhood. I think the current reality of City Hall, really obvious examples where this administration opposes real living wage legislation, opposes paid sick days, makes the lives of small businesses miserable, does not expand early childhood education, in fact is contracting it. All of those policies, those are real tangible policies that disproportionately hurt working class communities, poor communities, middle class communities farther out in the boroughs. It's a clear pattern. When it comes to Sandy and the aftermath of Sandy, and I'll talk about the Rockaways where I spend a lot of time, for example, which is a community that was hurting before Sandy, is hurting a lot more now. But people in the Rockaways, I think, are the first to say, they are far from convinced that government is paying attention to them because for decades they knew it wasn't. And the response did not encourage a sense that City Hall was equally on the side of all neighborhoods because it took a long time to arrive. There were community organizations, there were faith organizations that got there a hell of a lot quicker than government organizations did. So I think the Sandy experience teaches us government needs to reorient again to all neighborhoods. It has to be hands-on. I would have liked to have seen our city leaders, as I try to do, out with the people in every affected area. I would have liked to see the City of New York sponsor literally door-to-door efforts where every person affected was checked in on by city-trained folks to make sure, especially with seniors, with disabled, that someone was taking care of them. But in a lot of ways, I think the mayor just wanted to say, you know, mission accomplished, and everything's okay. But it's not okay for a lot of people. So I think a reorientation of the city government to the community level that requires accountability to people at the grassroots level is what I hope to achieve.
And my next question is regarding education and the overcrowding of schools. I mean, a lot of the candidates have said the things they would like to do, but the bottom line is the resources are needed. And when we talk about budget, a lot of people say, well, there's nowhere to get the money from. I mean, what would you do to allocate the necessary resources for schools and to deal with overcrowding?
And two parts of the answer. As a public school parent, you know, this is a huge focus of my life as public education. And one way that we start to address overcrowding is to put more of our capital budget proportionally into schools. Not just building new schools, in some cases it's building an annex, in some cases it's building a pre-K center. And I think we've really missed a boat on pre-K, and that leads to the second part of my answer, which is, if you look at what the candidates are saying, it will not shock you to find that the Republican candidates are not willing to ask for more revenue from those who have the most in our city. So any tax on the wealthy is off the table from the Republican point of view. But then you look at the Democratic candidates, and you might be surprised to find that some of them say also they would not be willing to tax those who are doing the best in New York City and ask them to help us overcome the education challenges you mentioned. From my point of view, I proposed, and I went in front of a leading business group to do it back in October, I proposed an income tax surcharge on families that make $500,000 or more for the next 5 years. And I'll give you an example. If you make $1 million, now I personally don't make $1 million. I don't know how many of you millionaires in the room tonight. But if you make $1 million under my plan, you would pay $2,000 more a year. You're not going to be driven out of New York, as some like to say. $2,000 more a year. And higher as you go up the income scale. But you know what it would allow us to do? It would get us $500 million a year for 5 years. That would allow us to create truly universal pre-K. We've heard those words. Every parent has heard the words universal pre-K, except we've never experienced it. You know what universal pre-K is? It means every 4-year-old in New York City who wants a full day pre-K seat could get it. Full day, not half day. Half day doesn't work for kids, it doesn't work for parents. Full day for every child who needs it. That's where we have to go. And with the same revenue, we can provide after-school programming, 3 to 6 p.m. for free for every middle school child who wants it, who wants to improve their education and strengthen themselves. And every parent in this room knows, with our middle school kids at a very sensitive age, if we knew they are not on the street, they are in a classroom for 3 more hours a day, they're going to be safe, and they'll be on the right path. I am the only candidate who says the wealthy have to help us achieve those goals for our children.
One question today.
Why stop at 2,000? Why not make it 10,000?
Well, Juan Manuel, that's my new finance commissioner right there. He has innovative ideas.
Mr. Blasio, was your opposition to the livery cab plan, giving them permits, was it in any way compromised by the fact that the medallion business had contributed contributed to your campaign in the last year?
No, and Juan Manuel, I've said to you that I said in the beginning, when the mayor first presented his plan, remember he came to he had to stay in the city, presented the notion of more outer borough street hails, etc. I said that was a good idea. And he presented an original vision of the plan, which I agreed with. And then inexplicably changed the plan in a way that I thought would undermine the financing of our entire transportation system and would undermine the ability to get street hails to work and by reservation car services to work. And I said we could actually still find a balance, and I worked very hard for that balance, and the mayor rejected it. Then on top of that, he would not go to the city council for a home rule method, which violated the state constitution, which the state Supreme Court found to be the case. So I think the mayor's approach was wrong in terms of democracy and was wrong in terms of substance. I still think we could strike a compromise that could help expand opportunity for people in the industry and could help us have more street hails. I still think that compromise is available, and when the court decision occurs, that might be the next obvious step to go back to the table and bring everyone to a common place.
So do you agree with the idea of giving livery cab drivers a permit that might be $1,500 worth?
I'm not sure that that dollar figure is fair. I agree with the idea of greater opportunity for livery drivers to end up having stronger business opportunities, yellow industry and beyond. I agree with more street hails. I agree with more disabled taxis. But the way the process was done, I think the final legislation undermines the whole financing of our transportation system and was unconstitutional.
And going back to the contribution, do you think that as a candidate, just the perception of a potential conflict of interest should be enough for you to reject certain contributions?
I think we always deal with this issue. Anyone who, like me, has been involved in reform movements for decades, trying to clean up this system, has to think about perception, of course. And I've led the charge nationally to try and get change after the Citizens United decision, for example, which I think has been polluting our political system with money. But I think in New York City, where everything we do is disclosed, every single donation I get is disclosed, and it's in very, very tight limits. And anyone who wants to know who has supported me can go online and know literally in 5 minutes. I think our system works well to make sure that everyone's accountable for any support that they receive. So yes, you have to think about perception, but I don't think under a system as good as ours that you say, you know, the rules aren't enough. I think our rules are enough to protect the public interest.
Do you think your alma mater, Columbia University, has mistreated this neighborhood? And would you have opposed the expansion?
My alma mater is a mixed bag, let me say that. And they charged me too much money for my education, too. I want a refund. No, I think it's a mixed bag, really. The time I was in the council, the different plans presented, obviously, I did not believe that anything was such that I should 100% oppose it. But I think the model of a lot of the big institutions in this city has been to be not consultative with communities and not sensitive to larger community needs, which are things, from my point of view, like local employment commitments and affordable housing creation. And what I'd like to see, and I've said this about developers as well, and there's a lot of parallel between the strength of some of the nonprofits like Columbia and NYU and the strength of a private sector developer at this point, that the city has to drive a much harder bargain. The Bloomberg model was development was good, and the notion of the public sector making demands on development should be kept within very tight limits. I look at it the other way. I am willing to see substantial development because that's how we get job creation, that's how we get affordable housing creation. But I like neighborhood-based hiring commitments, and I like maximizing affordable housing. And I believe you can have a very consultative process with the community, and I think if City Hall is saying that's a requirement, you'll see nonprofit and for-profit developers alike changing their tune.
So you don't think the expansion was fair to the community?
Again?
The expansion of Columbia University, was it fair to the community?
Again, I'm not gonna be disingenuous and say that I went out and identified specific things I would change because it wasn't something that I spent enough time on. But I will say for sure, what my model is that I want to undertake. I've heard plenty of concerns from the community that there was more that should have been done in the bargain, but I just don't want to say to you that I can identify exactly what I can only tell you the model I want to use going forward.
Mr. de Blasio, nearly 3/4 of the businesses, small businesses here in Washington Heights and neighborhood, employ 5 people or less. Can you specifically point to 3 things that you would do to help small businesses in this community?
Sure. I think people in this room know it, but I don't think the media knows it. Small business is the job creation engine in this city. It's certainly the job creation engine when you get outside of the whole city, with the exception of Manhattan below 96th Street. And the policies of the city have inhibited job growth. So one thing I would change right away, we've doubled the fines on small business. This administration, with the businessman mayor, has doubled the fines on small business in the course of a decade. I would roll back those fines because they're paralyzing small business and they're making it incredibly hard for businesses to create jobs, which is the priority. 1. 2, the city of New York spends about, an astounding figure, about $17 billion a year just to run a lot of the day-to-day work of the government. And that was $17 billion in procurement that we have to buy the things we need from different companies. The city doesn't even keep track of what percentage we buy from New York City-based businesses or what percentage we buy from minority and women-owned businesses. I think, and again, this is a Bloomberg worldview, the mayor doesn't think that anything like purchasing should be subject to larger social goals. Well, I think both the social and the economic goal of turning more of our purchasing to our neighborhoods, to businesses based in New York City, is foundational to the future of our economy. So that's 2. 3, we did a study in my office of public advocate. We did it with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and Axion, which is a micro-lending organization. And we studied about 700 immigrant small businesses around the city. And we found something that I know will not shock a lot of people in this room, but would certainly shock a lot of people who are watching TV and trying to understand what's happening in our small business. The vast majority, 92%, reported no positive interaction with the city government, no service, no support given to build their business, no legal services, no help in marketing, no help in navigating regulation, no help in finding credit in the middle of a credit crunch. I think in terms of immigrant small business in particular, we have an opportunity here to change the city's approach. Right away on legal services alone, the city could, I think, substantially save time, energy, and money for small businesses by making legal services available through city capacity to immigrant small businesses that need it.
We're going to move to some community questions, and these will be sort of rapid fire to allow for as many as possible. Subway repairs. For several years, the subways have been worked on. One audit documented $10 million in waste. How long will this go on? What oversight is there? And in my station in particular, 190th Street in Fort Washington, it's a mess. Is anyone monitoring this, and what would you do?
The fact that it's the MTA's responsibility, we don't run the MTA, does not mean that any mayor shouldn't care. I think the question is, and this is the way I would approach, how I try to approach being public advocate, is taking community input and then using the power of the office to force the hand of whatever agency involved to make the repairs. So my activist approach as mayor would be, if I knew of things, repairs like that weren't being made, to use the power of the mayoralty to push the MTA to prioritize those kind of repairs. One quick parallel, Housing Authority. The Housing Authority does a horrendous job of actually doing health and safety repairs when they need to do it, something we spend a huge amount of time on. This mayor does not push the Housing Authority to do its job in a coherent way. As mayor, I would make it a priority to get them to actually focus on the needs of the residents they serve.
And last question, what is the one thing that you would know Mayor Bloomberg has done well?
One thing? There's a number of things he's done well. If you say choose the one.
You only do the one thing.
Right, it's only one. No, I'm going to say honestly, because some people don't know this about me, I could name a number of things. The one that probably means the most to me is mayoral control of education. I think we needed, I was a school board member, and I know not everyone agrees. I was a community school board member, and there was some good in that system, but it was not going to allow us to make the fundamental changes we need to for the long term. It's certainly not getting us to things I believe in, like expanded early childhood education. I think mayoral control is a necessary model to do that. I'm sorry, I thought it was going to be like a lightning round here. That was a pretty dull lightning round.
So now you're critiquing the panelists. That's going to vote.
No, I think I like you very much, but I was ready to get like, listen, I just want to say thank you to everyone again. God bless you for being this deeply involved. This is an election that's still months away, but in this community, people care right now and are making a difference because you do. All I can say is, this is not only an extraordinarily important choice. After 12 years of a very particular type of leadership that I don't think we'll ever see again, we have to decide which way we want to go. I don't want to continue Michael Bloomberg's approach. I want something very different. I think that people need to demand something different that actually changes things and does not allow us to continue a tale of two cities, but actually brings us forward. Thank you very much.